My life had become very small by the time the call came. Most mornings, I woke up to the hum of the old fridge in my studio apartment, the distant hiss of buses braking at the corner, and the thin rectangle of light sneaking in through the cheap blinds. I'd boil water in my dented kettle, make instant coffee, and sit at my tiny table with my sketchbook, drawing floor plans for houses I'd never live in. It was a quiet routine, fragile but mine. That morning, my phone lit up with an unknown number as I was shading in the corner of an imaginary living room. I almost let it ring out. Then something in my chest whispered, "Answer it." I slid my thumb across the screen. "Hello. Is this Linnea?" A woman's voice, clipped and formal. For a moment, I didn't recognize the name as my own. No one from that side of the family had used it in years. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is Claire. Your aunt." The word aunt landed like a stone in a still pond. "Your grandmother, Evelyn, she passed away 2 days ago." The pencil slipped from my fingers and rolled onto the floor. The room didn't move, but something inside me shifted sideways. My grandmother. The one person I'd been told not to think about. The ghost at the edge of every argument between my parents. The woman who, according to my mother, had never bothered to see me after my father left. "I'm sorry," I said, because it felt like the correct response, even though I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. "There will be a small family gathering," Claire continued. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the faint clink of glass. "The will is being read on Saturday at the old house. It's expected that you attend." Expected. The word almost made me laugh. They hadn't expected anything of me when they said I didn't belong. When my mother came home years ago, eyes red, repeating those same words like a verdict, asterisk, "They said you'd never belong there, Linnea. We're on our own, asterisk." "Why now?" I heard myself ask. "You haven't spoken to us in over a decade." Claire sighed. "Because your name is mentioned in certain documents. It's easier if you just come and hear it from the lawyer." My name. Somewhere in that house, in legal ink or neat handwriting, my name existed in their world. After we hung up, I sat motionless as the kettle whistled itself dry on the stove. My apartment, with its scuffed parquet and second-hand sofa, seemed to tilt around me. That house, my father's world, my grandmother's world, had been the forbidden place on the hill when I was a child, visible from the bus window if I craned my neck. I remembered my mother's trembling voice the night my father left for good. "They said you'd never belong, Linnea. They said you were better off forgotten." She had folded those words around us like a shield and a prison. Now, after all these years, they wanted me there. Not as a child begging to be seen, but as a name in a document. I didn't know if I was walking into an inheritance or a humiliation. But as I stared at the faint crack in my ceiling, I knew one thing. I was going. The bus ride to my grandmother's town felt like rewinding a long, grainy tape. Outside the window, the city gave way to suburbs, then to long strips of fields broken by clusters of houses. The sky was a flat, wintry white, the kind that made everything look washed out. I watched my reflection in the glass, dark hair pulled back, simple black coat, nervous eyes trying not to look nervous. When the bus pulled into the small terminal, the air hit me with that familiar combination of damp earth and cold exhaust. I walked the uphill road alone, my boots clicking against the pavement. I knew the route without ever having walked it as an adult. I'd memorized it from the bus as a child. The house sat at the end of the road like a statement, white walls, slate roof, and tall iron gates that never seemed to open. Today, they were half open. A black car idled just inside, sending out lazy clouds of exhaust. I showed my invitation email to the man at the gate, though he barely glanced at it. Up close, the house felt bigger than I remembered, each window like an eye. As I reached the front steps, the door opened and a woman in a navy dress appeared. Claire. My aunt. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her posture was as straight as a ruler. Linnea, she said, careful, cool. You look like your father. I had heard that before, but never from someone who actually knew him. Hello, Aunt Claire. The words tasted strange. We didn't hug. She stepped aside to let me in. The entrance hall smelled of polished wood and faint perfume. A grandfather clock ticked in the corner, measured and indifferent. Inside, family members gathered in small clusters, their voices low. I recognized no one, yet their faces felt like distorted mirrors, familiar features rearranged. A middle-aged man with my father's jawline. A woman whose eyes crinkled like mine when she forced a smile. A murmur moved through the room as they noticed me. I caught fragments. Is that her? Hasn't been around in years. I thought they cut ties. A cousin I'd never met approached me with the polite stiffness of someone extending a hand to a stranger. You must be Linnea. I'm Marcus. His handshake was dry, brief. Sorry for your loss, I said. It felt like the only line in the script I knew. An older woman in pearls, standing near the fireplace, looked me up and down with open appraisal. I didn't think she'd actually come, she said, not bothering to lower her voice. My ears burned, but my tone stayed level. You invited me. I assumed it was more than a courtesy. Her mouth tightened. We'll see. They moved around me like I was a piece of furniture they hadn't ordered. I stood under the chandelier, the crystals casting fractured light over the polished floor, and felt that old ache pushing up from somewhere deep. The same ache I'd felt as a kid, watching the house shrink through the bus window, listening to my mother whisper that we were not wanted. They had spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now they had summoned me like a footnote. A small framed photograph on a side table caught my eye, my grandmother, Evelyn, younger and vibrant, laughing at something just out of frame. I stared at her face, searching for any resemblance, any hint that I belonged to this place beyond blood and rumor. In the reflection of the glass, I saw someone step closer. Claire, standing at my shoulder. She kept that photo in her room until the end, she said quietly. You look like her when you're thinking. I swallowed. She never asked to see me. Claire's gaze flickered. That's not entirely true. Before I could ask what she meant, a man in a dark suit stepped into the doorway, a leather folder in his hand. The lawyer's here, someone whispered. As we moved toward the study, I realized what was really at stake wasn't just money or property. It was whether, in any official way, this house would ever acknowledge that I had been part of its story all along. The study was smaller than I expected, with wood-paneled walls and a heavy desk by the window. Outside, bare branches scratched softly against the glass, their shadows moving like slow handwriting across the curtains. The lawyer introduced himself as Daniel Rowe. His voice was steady, practiced. We took our seats, family grouped together on leather chairs and the sofa, me on a single chair near the corner, close enough to hear, far enough to remind everyone that I was still slightly outside their circle. Daniel opened his folder, the rustle of paper filling the quiet. We're here to execute the last will and testament of Evelyn Hart, he began. I'll read through the key provisions and address any questions afterward. He listed small bequests first, jewelry to this aunt, sentimental items to that cousin. Around me, people nodded, some dabbing at their eyes, others checking phones on their laps when they thought no one was looking. Then he said my name. To my granddaughter, Linnea Hart. The room stilled. I felt more than saw the shift of attention. I leave the contents of the cedar chest located at the foot of my bed, and any personal letters addressed to her by name. My breath caught. Letters. Claire cleared her throat. We have them here. Daniel nodded. Yes. Mrs. Hart requested that one such letter be given to Linnea prior to the conclusion of this reading, as it contains context she felt was important. He reached into his folder and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, edges softened by time. My name was written on the front in a looping script I hadn't seen since I was very young, on birthday cards that stopped arriving after the fights, after my father left. My hand shook slightly as I took it. The paper was warm from Daniel's touch, the ink faintly smudged, as if my grandmother had hesitated over the letters. "Feel free to read it now," he said. Mrs. Hart's instructions were explicit. Everyone watched as I carefully opened the envelope. The faint scent of lavender rose up, startling in its tenderness. "My dearest Linnea," the letter began. My eyes moved across the page, the words drawing the air from the room. She wrote about the day I was born, the way my father had cried when he first held me. She described my small hand curling around her finger, my dark hair sticking up in soft tufts. She wrote about how proud she had been to have a granddaughter. Then the letter shifted. The handwriting grew tighter, as though pressed down with more force. "I am sorry for the years you were kept from this house," she wrote. I was wrong to let anger at your mother blind me to you. There were things said, cruel, unforgivable things, about you never belonging here. I said some of them. I cannot undo that, My throat tightened. The room faded, leaving only the rhythm of her confession. Your father's leaving broke something in all of us. I let others convince me it was easier if you were kept away. But as the years passed, the quiet grew louder. I began writing to you, but Claire said your mother returned my letters unopened. I don't know if that was your mother's choice or hers. Perhaps both, I felt Claire's gaze burning into the side of my face. I want you to know that you were always mine, even when I was too proud to say it aloud. That is why I have changed my will. The cottage on the edge of the property, the one your grandfather built with his own hands, will be transferred into your name upon my passing. Others may protest. They may say you do not belong. This letter is my answer to them, My eyes flew to Daniel. He looked back at me, then calmly resumed reading aloud from the will. To my granddaughter, Linnea Hart, I bequeath the stone cottage and the surrounding half-acre of land, as described in Section B of this document. Gasps. A sharp intake of breath from someone across the room. The scrape of a chair leg. That cottage is part of the estate, the woman in pearls snapped. It's always been assumed. That's why it's in the will, Daniel replied, unruffled. Mrs. Hart's wishes are very clear. Additionally, this letter is recognized as an explanatory document. I lowered my gaze back to the page. The final lines blurred, but I forced them into focus. They may try to keep you out. They may say you're only here for what they have. Let them talk. Walk up to this hill with your head high and this letter in your hand. It is proof that you were never a mistake. You were always meant to have a place here, The paper trembled between my fingers. In that moment, the weight of years of being told, directly or indirectly, that I didn't belong pressed down, and then, slowly, began to lift. For the first time, I had something solid. Not just stories or accusations, but ink on paper in my grandmother's own hand. Proof. The discussion that followed was not loud. That almost made it worse. I'm not questioning Aunt Evelyn's competence, the woman in pearls, who I now knew was my great-aunt Margaret, said, her voice controlled. I'm questioning the fairness. Linnea has never been part of this family. The words landed with the same cold precision they'd had when my mother repeated them years ago. They said you'd never belong, only this time, I wasn't a child on the outside of the gate. I was inside the house, with my grandmother's letter in my hand. Daniel folded his hands on the desk. Fairness is subjective, Mrs. Whitmore. Legality is not. Mrs. Hart was fully competent when she revised her will. I oversaw the changes myself. The property in question is now designated for Linnea. Marcus shifted in his chair, glancing between me and his mother. It's just a cottage, he muttered. We still have the main house. Margaret shot him a sharp look, but said nothing. Claire spoke then, softly but firmly. Mother talked about that cottage for months before she changed the will. She said it was where she and Dad were happiest. She wanted someone who wasn't tangled up in the rest of this house to have it. Linnea was the only person she mentioned by name. I stared at my aunt. The woman who had called to summon me like an obligation was now defending me. Or defending our grandmother. Maybe both. Margaret turned to Claire. You never told us she was making such a change. You never asked, Claire replied. You were too busy arguing about who would get the dining set. A thin crack of tension flickered through the room. No one raised their voice. Instead, they wielded calm words like knives. I looked down at the letter again, tracing the final sentence with my eyes. Walk up to this hill with your head high and this letter in your hand. I don't want to take anything that isn't mine, I said quietly, the steadiness of my own voice surprising me. But this cottage, she chose this for me. That's not something I asked for. It's something she gave. All you've ever done is stay away, Margaret said. And now you appear the moment there's something to gain. How convenient. I folded the letter carefully, the paper whispering as it creased. I stayed away because you made it clear I wasn't wanted. My mother left this hill in tears. She spent years telling me that you said I would never belong here. That I was better off forgotten. No one contradicted me. Daniel cleared his throat gently. If there are no formal legal objections to the will. There aren't, Claire cut in. Mother's wishes stand. Margaret inhaled sharply. You'll side with her over us. I'm siding with the document Mother signed, Claire replied. And with the truth we buried for too long. The room seemed to contract, the air thick with unspoken grievances. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall managed to find its way into the silence, each second a reminder that this moment was passing whether they liked it or not. I'd like to see the cottage, I said. If that's allowed. It's yours, Daniel said. You don't need anyone's permission. But as I stood to leave, I felt every pair of eyes on me. Some held resentment, some curiosity, and one, Claire's, held something more complicated. Regret, maybe. Or relief. On my way out of the study, Margaret's voice followed me, soft but clear. You'll never really be one of us, you know. I paused at the doorway, my back still turned. I don't think that's what Grandma wanted, I said. And right now, she's the only one I'm answering to. I stepped into the hallway, the weight of the house pressing in behind me. I slipped the letter into my coat pocket, feeling its edges against my ribcage. Justice didn't feel like a victory shout. It felt like this quiet, steady knowing, that after years of being erased, my name was finally written somewhere they couldn't easily tear it out. The cottage sat at the edge of the property, half hidden behind a stand of bare trees. The path that led there was uneven, paved with stones that had shifted over the years. Leaves, damp from last night's rain, clung to the ground. As I walked, the main house receded behind me, its windows glowing like distant eyes. The air smelled of wet earth and faint wood smoke. When I reached the cottage, I stopped and just looked at it. It was small, built of pale stone, with a sloping roof and ivy that had gone dry and brown for the winter. The front door was painted a soft blue, weathered at the edges. One of the upstairs windows was slightly crooked, as if the house itself was tilting its head in curiosity. I slipped the key Daniel had given me into the lock. It turned with a reluctant click, like it hadn't been used in a while. The hinges creaked as I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cool and still. Dust motes floated in the light that spilled through the front windows, turning slowly as if they had all the time in the world. The living room was simple, a small fireplace, 2 worn armchairs, a bookshelf half filled with old novels. A knitted throw was folded over the back of one chair, as if someone had just stepped outside for a moment. I ran my fingers along the edge of the mantel. A row of framed photos stood there, my grandparents on their wedding day, my grandfather holding a fishing rod, my grandmother laughing with her head thrown back. And there, tucked between 2 larger frames, was a smaller photograph. Me, at around 4 years old, standing in a park. My father kneeling beside me, one arm around my waist. My hair was in 2 lopsided pigtails, my face smeared with what looked like ice cream. Someone had caught us mid-laugh. I hadn't known this picture existed, but my grandmother had placed it here, in the heart of the cottage. "Hey," I whispered to the empty room. "You knew me better than I thought." I moved through the small kitchen, the narrow staircase, the bedroom with its neatly made bed and embroidered pillows. The house didn't feel haunted by regret. It felt paused, waiting. In the bedroom, on the nightstand, I found another envelope, sealed and addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it, half expecting another confession heavy with sorrow. This one was different. Shorter. Lighter. "If you are reading this, it means you made it up the hill," my grandmother had written. "It means you did not let the word never be the end of your story. This cottage was built as a beginning. Your grandfather and I started our life here. We fought and reconciled here. We dreamed here, I hope you will use it to build something of your own. Not a replacement for what was taken from you, but a space that fits who you are now, Paint the walls. Change the furniture. Fill it with people who see you, not just your last name. And if the main house continues to say you don't belong, let it. You have a front door of your own now, with more love than I ever managed to show. Grandma Evelyn, Tears blurred the ink, but I didn't wipe them away. They felt right here, among her words and the quiet creak of the cottage settling around me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the letter still in my hand, and let the reality of it sink in. This wasn't just about a legal victory or a piece of property. It was about having a place where my existence was not an argument, but a given. Over the next weeks, I began to come back on weekends. I scrubbed floors, opened windows, and let fresh air push out the stale. I painted the living room a warm, soft color that reminded me of morning light in my old apartment. I brought my sketchbooks and started drawing not imaginary houses, but new versions of this cottage, with a small studio added at the back, with a long table where friends could gather. Claire visited once, unannounced. She stood in the doorway with a bag of groceries in her hand, looking smaller somehow, without the armor of the main house behind her. "I wanted to see what you'd done with the place," she said. We made tea. We talked, not about blame or old fights, but about my father, about the way he used to drum his fingers on tabletops when he was thinking, a habit I'd always thought was mine alone. She admitted to returning some of my grandmother's early letters to my mother unopened, too afraid of reopening old wounds. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes on the steam rising from her cup. "We said you'd never belong because we didn't know how to make space for our own guilt." I held her apology gently, like the fragile thing it was. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive everything," I said. "But I'm ready to stop carrying it around like a weight." Outside, the afternoon light shifted, stretching long shadows across the floor. The cottage had started to feel less like a stranger's memory and more like a draft of my future. In time, I moved in fully. The main house remained what it had always been, proper, guarded, a monument to a version of family that had no room for me. But I no longer stood at its gates, aching to be invited in. Instead, I sat at my own small table by the cottage window, drawing up plans for a life that finally included me. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, I could hear faint sounds drifting from the big house, clinking glasses, distant conversations, the familiar tick of the grandfather clock. I would fold my grandmother's letters back into their envelopes and place them carefully on the mantel. They said I'd never belong, I would think, not with bitterness but with a quiet clarity. Then I'd look around at the walls I'd painted, the life I was building, the keys sewn into the inside pocket of my coat. And yet, I'd whisper to myself, I'm home.